Now it is my honor to invite Professor Matt Bloom back to the stage for another presentation. Won't you welcome him, please?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Bishop D. I want to thank you for your really compelling report. There was a lot for me to think about in it, and I want to affirm that among the wisest of all well-being practices are some of our spiritual practices, and you named some important ones. So thank you for that. And you've also really given me a great platform for the focus of this morning, which is on connectedness and the importance of social relationships. When I started to do this work 30 years ago and I began to work with denominations and agencies, I heard a lot about self-care. And I have a bit of a concern about self-care. Now, certainly our well-being, we have a large responsibility in our well-being. But I think there tends to be an overemphasis on self-care that causes us to overlook the profound interconnections that exist among the well-being of all of us. And I shared yesterday with you from the Harvard study of adult development, 75, now 85 years of following men as they aged. And when asked what was the single most important thing for well-being over a lifespan, as I shared with you yesterday, the director said, relationships, relationships, relationships. I want to share with you a little bit from another amazing long-term study done in Massachusetts, this time in Framingham, Massachusetts. It likewise started in the 1940s with about 5,000 adults who, like the Harvard men, were willing to undergo every 2 years extensive physical examinations, questionnaires, and interviews. The study then included children of the original participants and now grandchildren of the original participants. So this study has been going on more than 80 years. It's known as the Framingham Heart Study. And not only have they been able to yield incredibly groundbreaking discoveries in things like the causes of cardiovascular disease, but they've also been able to focus on well-being. And we know, for example, some of the genetic components of well-being because 3 generations of Framingham residents have been willing to participate in this ongoing study. But what was unique about this study, different from the Harvard Men's study, is that it was a group of people living in the same community. And it allowed Framingham researchers to study some of the social connections among well-being. And I want to share with you just a few of the results to highlight the importance of the interconnections among our well-being. Among the causes of depression, we know, are a number of things, including some physiological causes. But there are profound social causes of well-being, of depression. The Framingham study found out that if your friend is depressed, your chances of becoming depressed double. You're 100% more likely. And if your next door neighbor is depressed, you're 200% more likely to become depressed. As the researcher summarized it, they said that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Your chance of becoming happy, which is a good thing. Happy is having a positive outlook on life, feeling good most days. Your chances of being happy are 70% more likely, 75% more likely if you have a happy friend, 35% more likely if you have a happy neighbor. But what the study revealed is that the social causes of our well-being are even more distant than that. If you have a happy friend who lives a mile away, it increases your chance of being happy by 25%. This is the way the researchers summarized the profound social connections among our well-being. They said it doesn't end with the people that you are connected with directly, but you may not know him personally, but your friend's husband's coworker can make you depressed, and your sister's friend's boyfriend can make you happy. In a study of 1,200 teachers across 26 schools to study depression, they found out that, perhaps not surprisingly, burnout spread more rapidly among teachers working in the same schools. But they found that burnout even spread across schools. Through the subtle interconnections that teachers had, depression spread among teachers who didn't even work directly. And this shocked me. that if you worked with a burned out teacher 2 years ago, your chances of becoming burned out today increase significantly. A recent study, worldwide study of 680,000 people on social media, found that depression, anxiety, and happiness spread through social media connections. Simply reading about or seeing pictures of what people do can affect your well-being. We live in ecosystems of well-being, whether we know it or not. So take just a minute to imagine, do you know 20 people that you're close to in your ecosystem? Family, friends, neighbors, coworkers. It's probably fairly easy to imagine 20 people. Now imagine that each of those 20 people have 20 other people connected to them close in their ecosystems. This places you in the middle of an ecosystem of well-being with as many as 8,000 people. We know there are ecosystems in the biological world, places and communities in which plants and animals are profoundly interconnected and where the well-being of one impacts the well-being of others. And we live in those social ecosystems. We live in ecosystems of well-being. The pandemic taught us this. We could pass by someone that we barely knew, and we might have contracted a disease that could have profoundly affected our physical health. The challenge is that we often overlook these profound and deep interconnections. And this emphasis on self-care belies the fact that other people affect your well-being and you affect theirs. And these effects aren't always as direct as somebody either treating you kindly or treating you poorly. These impacts of well-being spread in deeply subtle ways, ways that we don't even notice, ways that we may not be aware of. And so one of the well-being practices that I think is important for all of us to engage in is to start mapping out our own well-being ecosystems. Who are the people that we interact with that shape us and that we shape? How do we affect their health and their well-being? And I've used this exercise with a variety of groups and pastors, and it's a fairly simple exercise, but it's one that I encourage you to do. Draw a series of concentric rings. And what you're trying to do is to set up a model of your ecosystem, with the rings being closer to the middle are those people that you interact with most often, and the rings towards the outer edges are the people that you interact with more occasionally. But remembering that your friend's husband's coworker can affect your well-being, those people on the outer edges may be important as well. So start to think about who are the people that you interact with most often. And this interaction is what seems to be even more important than how emotionally close you are. Emotional closeness matters, but it's the people that you interact with. Who do you see every day or most days? Your family, and probably some friends are a part of that inner circle, those people who are closest to you in your well-being ecosystem. If you're a pastor or a part of a ministry team, where would you put your church? How often do you interact with people in your church or with the ministry team? How close are they to your inner circle? What about other friends or other companions? I mentioned yesterday the kinds of activities that you might engage in. Model railroading, I mentioned, or golf, or for me, hiking. Those are individuals that you interact with. Who are they? How about your neighbors? Who are the neighbors next door, and who are those neighbors that perhaps are a mile away? Those people that you see occasionally, but that you still see. And it's important to put in your well-being ecosystem those people with whom you might have more difficult or contentious relationships, because they have a strong impact on your well-being. Remember the 3-to-1 ratio, 3 good days for every 1 bad day? That 3-to-1 ratio seems to apply in a lot of different settings. For example, we know that marriages that have 3 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction are the strongest and longest lasting marriages. And so we need to think about the kinds of interactions that we have with people. And if there is that contentious person, that difficult person, how can we also make sure that we're surrounded by those people who are life-giving to us? So we need to know who those individuals are. And as you think about this well-being ecosystem, we need to add in the social media impacts on our lives. I recently stopped all of my social media connections. And I did this because one of the ones that I participated in is a professional social media organization called LinkedIn. You might be a part of this. And I started to notice how profound people were being affected by the ways that people posted things on LinkedIn. And I started to notice a number of people that would post something like this. They would say something like, "I'm so humbled to have received the award as the most amazing teacher," or something. Right? And at first I thought this was sort of silly, and I sort of laughed. But in those posts, I think there's a deep need. They want to be humble. They want to be modest. And yet the pressure of social media causes them to need to say something about themselves, somehow keep up with the other people on social media. And I found that true of myself. When I finally stopped being on LinkedIn, it was an afternoon, and I'm a bit embarrassed, although I will say this to you. I had spent 2.5 hours trying to make my LinkedIn page more impressive. I thought, what in the world am I doing? So I stopped. I just had to stop because it was affecting my well-being. It was affecting the way that I showed up. It was affecting the way I felt about myself. I was surprised. I would spend 20 minutes on LinkedIn and I would feel bad. I would feel like I wasn't doing enough. I feel like I wasn't impressive enough, and I don't want those feelings. We need to understand our well-being ecosystems. We need to know who impacts us. We need to be honest with ourselves. And we need to know whose well-being we impact and how we shape their lives. This next well-being practice is perhaps more specific to pastors and ministry teams in local churches, although individuals I'm largely now retired from active teaching. Even those of us that are retired might think of how we could apply this. But I think there's opportunities for you to think about the ecosystem, the well-being ecosystem of your local church. Thinking about the well-being of your local church and who are the individuals that have the most profound impact on the well-being of the church as it is. So a similar sort of experience or exercise where you think about the well-being of your church, the quality of the daily experiences that people have when they're in church, how quickly your church bounces back from setbacks, the extent to which the church has a shared sense of meaning and of ministry, the way people feel about themselves when they come into your church. Bishop D mentioned that. Do they feel, noticed and named and known and needed? And what are the quality of the connections that people have? And then who are the people that impact that? I'm sure the ministry team would be among the most important, but who are those other individuals? They may be the lay leaders on the council, but the churches that I've been a part of, it's oftentimes some of the people that are in the background. When Kim was a pastor, there was a woman, Ginger. She was never a leader. She never wanted to be a leader, but she was an amazing person, a delight, a caregiver, an affirmer. She created strong well-being in the church. Who are those people that are in the middle of the church? I'm going to make a suggestion for what you might do with those people. So we need to know who has the strongest impact. And then there'll be some people that are a bit more on the periphery, but perhaps still important. And I think sometimes these are the individuals that are part of the ministry team, but maybe some of the people like the Sunday school teachers, or perhaps somebody in the choir, or the choral director. And then, of course, there are people further out, the ones who come on Sundays, or maybe come occasionally on Sundays. They're still a part of it. You're interested in creating a well-being ecosystem that draws those people on the outside more fully in. What if you thought about the well-being of your church as a way to do ministry? And you've got to think about the people that are difficult. When Kim was a pastor, there was another woman, Donna Lou. Bless her heart, she just couldn't get out of her own way from being a pain in the neck. She just was constantly complaining about the most ridiculous things. One day she was up in arms because one of the candles on the altar had burned out and nobody had replaced it. Donna Lou had this way of needling people, of getting under their skin. And it stunned me one day when she even frustrated Ginger. Ginger, the most delightful, positive person in the world, finally got exasperated with Donna Lou. Well, those people are a part of the well-being ecosystem as well. And one of the things that I think could happen is, how could this inner circle start to address those people who are part of the caustic group? How could this inner circle somehow help restore or heal, or maybe the best approach is just to buffer everybody else from the caustic effects of that individual? So we put together, my team and I, a series, a resource, and I'll make sure that I share this with Tammy, where you can start thinking about your leadership team as an ecosystem, as a well-being ecosystem, and then once you've developed that sense of an understanding, to broaden it more to the church as a well-being ecosystem. So it's a 7-part journey. There's a little bit of a video, there's some discussion questions, there's some personal reflection questions, there's some group reflection questions, and then there's some suggested action items that will take you from why well-being matters, and now you are better versed in that, having spent time together here. A little bit of the science of well-being, just to help ground people in what it is and a common understanding. An opportunity for the members of that team to talk about their own individual well-being. What a marvelous moment to form a stronger connection, to share with each other where you're doing well, and to share with each other the places that you could use their support. Perhaps your daily well-being is not as strong as you want it to be. And then you start to think about the well-being, not just of the individuals, but this group. How does this group come together? When we're together, what is our well-being like? And then move on to thinking about the well-being of a church. My belief is that churches should be a fundamental part of the well-being ecosystem of anybody who joins them. And I'm trying to imagine, what might it be like if we started to think and operate with churches in that way? So we're part of well-being ecosystems. We need to pay attention to them. By paying attention to them, we first need to know who's in our well-being ecosystem and whose well-being ecosystems are we a part of. And then we can be more intentional about the ways that we interact with those people and the ways that we provide support. So one metaphor for the importance of social relationships is an ecosystem, these deep interconnections, these subtle interconnections, these interconnections that even when they're distant might affect us. And I want to switch gears a little bit and use a second metaphor to talk about the importance of social relationships. And again, I'm going to focus a bit more on pastors and ministry teams, but invite you to think about how it might apply to you. And I'm going to use the metaphor of a stage, of a theater stage. Talk about the stages of ministry or the stages of social support. So like any metaphor, it has its limitations, so bear with me. But when you think about fulfilling any role, it could be the role of a parent, but certainly the role of a pastor, me in the role as a professor, there is a kind of performative aspect to that. There's an audience that we're performing to. When we're on the front stage, there are certain ways of behaving, certain actions, certain kinds of activities, certain ways of communicating that we engage in as we're filling that role. Now, we're not faking it like somebody in a theater, perhaps. We're not pretending. But we're showing up in particular ways and performing to an audience that is out there. Now, of course, the more authentic we can be in our performances, the better. If our self-integrity is strong, we can show up more in those performative roles, more true to ourselves, but nevertheless, there is a performance. And a part of what sustains us in that front stage is to be able to have a backstage. In the backstage, we step out of that role, but we're still in the same context or social context in which we perform that role. And what research shows us is that as important as significant others might be, in that backstage, what's even more important are similar others. People who share a role on the front stage with us, or are playing a role in some other front stage that is similar to our own. You remember I told you that awkward story of Kim preaching and people complimenting her hair and dress and me not getting the fact that she was actually being kind of insulted. I was not a part of her backstage, and I couldn't be. I didn't know what it was like to be a pastor. I don't know what it's like to perform the role of a pastor, and I had no idea what it was like to be a woman performing a pastoral role. Similar others are a key part of our backstage because they can do things that even significant others can't do. And these are really important for sustaining our well-being and for us helping to sustain theirs. They can process the good, the bad, and the ugly. Nobody knows what it's like to preach a good sermon and feel good about it like somebody who's preached a sermon. Nobody knows how hard it is to feel like you've bombed in a sermon than somebody who's preached a sermon. Nobody knows what it's like to be embarrassed in your role. There was a time when I needed to fire a member of my research team. I did a terrible job. I met with this person 4 times and I tried what they call the sandwich approach. You know, you're a really nice person, I really appreciate you, and you're fired, and I really think you're a nice person, and so like putting you're fired in the middle. And it took 4 meetings, and this person didn't understand it until I finally went in and said, you're fired, and then they were quite angry at me because I realized 4 meetings ago I was trying to communicate that to them. I needed a place to process that ugly experience. I needed somebody that I could talk to about why did I do that? Why did I behave that way? And how might I have done it better? So this is a place to practice and rehearse and improvise, to try out things. If you've got to have a difficult conversation, the backstage is a place where people who understand the difficulty can help you with it. They know like nobody else what it is to be in that position, and they can commiserate with you about the difficulty, and they can offer you advice that's personalized to the particular situation and to you. And again, significant others are important, but they often can't provide that unique and deep and powerful sort of input. I've often, and if you'll permit me, Bishop Dee, I've often thought of you. I mean, being a bishop is really tough. And as much as we all might want to support her, backstage where there are other people who fill those senior leadership roles can be a place to say, wow, this is tough, or wow, this is amazing, and people can appreciate it. It's a place just to relax, to be more fully yourself, to not have to be Pastor Sue or Deacon Joe, but to just be yourself among people who will embrace you more fully as yourself. And it's a place to just be cared for. Pastors often aren't cared for. Ministry team members often aren't cared for. It's a place to be cared for. Now, I had to look for a backstage. I often didn't have one. I needed to find somebody who led a research team, somebody who was a professor, somebody that I could sit down with. And when I did find it, it was absolutely amazing. And it was actually easier than I thought. It was a bit weird because I identified some other professors and I felt a bit like I was asking them out for the date, or like, would you be my friend? But I talked to them about, hey, I'm leading a research team and you are, and it's tougher than I thought. Would you want to get together for coffee? What amazed me is everybody I asked said, oh my gosh, yes. And we had a marvelous team. And then just to stretch that metaphor a little bit further, we need an offstage. You need a place where you can step fully out of that role and be who you are. One of my favorite stories of this is a priest who was a runner, and he was a part of a running club. And he loved running with them. Every Saturday morning they'd go out and run and had a great time. And they told these sort of off-color, well, I guess pretty dirty jokes, and it was just a part of running. And one day somebody on the team found out that he was a priest. And he thought, oh no, with them I'm just Joe. Now I'm going to be Father Joe. But he said the next Sunday they started running and one person told a dirty joke and he's like, yes, I'm just Joe with these people. I've learned that one of the best things I can do for pastors when we go out for a meal is offer to pray. It seems like when you go out with a pastor, oh no, she's got to pray. We need places to step out of those roles where we can just be who we are. One of the women that we interviewed in the Episcopal Church said her favorite thing to do at the end of the day is to take off her collar and throw it on the counter, because then she can step out of the role. So think about a backstage and who might be a part of your backstage and how you might invite people to be a part of that. So we have ecosystems. Who's in your ecosystem? And how can you pay attention and nurture the ecosystem? How might you think of your local church as a well-being ecosystem? And how might that attention open up new ministry opportunities, new ways of forming a tight and a well-performing and important church, and how might you think of a backstage? I want to share a few more wise well-being practices, and then I'm going to invite you to ask a few questions, and then we'll close. These are among the wisest well-being practices that all of us should engage in. So while there may be a few of the ones that I've presented or some others that you may decide not to, these are ones that are important for all of us. So one of them is that we all need good rest. For years, I thought I was one of these people that only needed about 5 or 6 hours of sleep. One of my colleagues at Notre Dame is a sleep researcher, and she said that is not true at all. We all need 8 or 9 hours of sleep a night. I have a problem sleeping. I don't sleep very well, so I've had to address this with my physician. And now she's got me on a wonderful routine of supplements where I'm actually sleeping well. We need to find a way to rest. We need to get good rest. And whether that comes in the form of a good night's sleep or a partial night's sleep and some naps throughout the day, we all need sleep. And if you're like me and you don't sleep well, it's something to actually take action to address. It would be good for all of us to have some kind of contemplative practice. Now, mindfulness meditation has gained a lot of popularity, and that's just one kind of contemplative practice. A contemplative practice is simply a practice in which you try to settle your mind and your body, sitting in the present moment and trying to think about the present moment. Now, when I first started trying these sit down and focus on your breath meditations, they just didn't work for me. And I thought somehow something was wrong with me because I tried all kinds, focus on a flower, focus on your breath, it didn't work for me. Until one day, I literally stumbled into what works for me. I was out hiking, and I caught my toe on a rock and stumbled. I'd been hiking for 3 hours, and I realized until that moment, I'd only been thinking about hiking. So walking or hiking meditation works for me. Perhaps contemplative prayer or centering prayer would work for you, or Lectio Divina. But some practice, and what research shows is just 5 minutes, a 5-minute practice that calms your thoughts and calms your emotions can be really powerful. And there are a variety of ways that you might do this. One of my friends says that when she knits, that's a contemplative practice, because when she's knitting, she's just thinking about knitting. She's just in the present moment. And then you ought to have one of these things that we call a hobby. Part of the reason is because you enjoy them, and enjoyment boosts your well-being. Another part of it is because it helps you be more resilient. It has this growth capacity. But a third important reason is because this is a place where you can have strong and positive social connection. Somebody shared with me yesterday that this hobby that they've been a part of for years, the people that they've done that hobby with are now among their closest friends, godparents to their children. These are opportunities where we meet people around a common interest that opens up the possibility for us to form deep and lasting friendships. They become an important part of our ecosystem. So, good rest, some sort of contemplative practice that slows your thinking, and a hobby, or what researchers now call a restorative niche. We wanted to get rid of the hobby, a restorative niche.